Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 14 wide receiver start or sit decisions for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, we're going to be going in depth into every single matchup from Thursday Night Football all the way until Monday Night Football, and I'll be telling you guys whether I believe you should start or sit the wide receivers in every single matchup. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below, because not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do hit that like button down below to help boost today's video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can hear about my week number 14 wide receiver start or sit decisions. I would also like to ask, if you guys are on Twitter and would like to follow me on there, to please do so at Notorious FNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 14 wide receiver start or sit decisions. We begin with Thursday Night Football, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Minnesota Vikings. In this game, the Vikings will be down a man, as Adam Thielen is not going to be playing in this game because of his high ankle sprain. That is going to elevate KJ Osborne to be the number 2 wide receiver on the team behind Justin Jefferson. Now, earlier on in the season, we talked a lot about KJ Osborne because while he was the number 3 wide receiver on the team, he showed flashes of being really good. He had some games where he would finish as a top 24 wide receiver on the week, so he was discussed a lot earlier on in the season. As of recently, that same kind of pizzazz, that same kind of flash wasn't really there for KJ Osborne. But last week, after Adam Thielen ended up going down up against the Detroit Lions in the game they ultimately lost, we did see KJ Osborne be relatively involved, and that is why I'm so confident in saying that he is the clear number 2 wide receiver behind Justin Jefferson with Adam Thielen out. And I think if Adam Thielen's injury lasts a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking a lot about KJ Osborne, because he is a very talented player, a very underrated player in a very solid spot to succeed. This is a matchup that could be very high scoring, especially if the Pittsburgh Steelers offense looks like the second half versus the Baltimore Ravens compared to the first half of that game, because in the first half, they weren't really doing all that much, but in the second half, things started to fire at all cylinders. And I think if this game is able to be really high scoring, like I think it could be on Thursday Night Football, then KJ Osborne could have an excellent game. He is a guy that I'm considering potentially finishing as a top 24 wide receiver on the week. Is that a locked and loaded top 24 wide receiver? Of course not, but he is a guy with that upside. In terms of Justin Jefferson, you're going to start this guy every single week, doesn't matter of the defensive matchup. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers defense has been pretty confusing, because on paper, they are a very solid defense, but when you see them actually play, they're not all that great. So I think Justin Jefferson should have no issue at all having a big game with Mr. You Like That, Kirk Cousins, throwing him the ball. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, we saw Deontay Johnson absolutely dominate up against the Baltimore Ravens in the second half of that game. In the first half of the game, Deontay Johnson wasn't doing shit at all. There was no points going his way. He was getting targeted. It was just that Big Ben was pretty off on those targets, and Deontay Johnson wasn't coming down with anything. But in the second half of the game, Deontay Johnson dominated, like I said, and I think this week up against the Minnesota Vikings defense, you can heavily rely on Deontay Johnson. Typically, even when Big Ben Roethlisberger is having these big games, these shit games, Deontay Johnson is still able to elevate himself to potentially be a top 12, maybe even a top 5 wide receiver on the week. So even if Big Ben struggles a bit in this game, I still think Deontay Johnson should be just fine without Juju Smith-Schuster, who has been out for a while at this point in the season. Chase Claypool is the clear number 2 wide receiver on the team. He does get a lot of targets, but typically he is not as immune to the bad games of Big Ben, because if Big Ben really stinks it up there, right, if he really has a shitty game, then Chase Claypool is not really able to elevate himself past that, whereas Deontay Johnson is. But I do think that Big Ben is going to continue on this positive track and look good up against the Vikings defense. So I do like Chase Claypool in this matchup. So start up all the wide receivers in this game. Next up, we move to the beginning of the Sunday slate with the Dallas Cowboys at the Washington Football Team. In this game, I also basically like all of the wide receivers, all of the notable wide receivers, that is. In terms of the Washington Football Team, Terry McLaurin hasn't been amazing this season, but he also hasn't been a complete and utter fucking bust. The problem with Terry McLaurin doesn't really have to do with the fact that Terry McLaurin is a bad bad player or not. It just has to do with his target share. Some weeks, we see this guy just dominating, getting a million targets, and then in other games, he kind of just fades away. Here up against the Dallas Cowboys, you would project this to be a high-scoring, back-and-forth, tit-for-tat affair between the Washington football team and the Dallas Cowboys. That's why I really like Terry McLaurin in this game. For the Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, those are two guys that are in your lineup every single week when they're healthy. Now, last week, we got a bit tricked by Amari Cooper. Now, right before the game, it came out that, hey, going up against the Saints, they're not going to use Amari Cooper as much. He's going to go out there, he's going to run some routes, but this is not going to be the typical Amari Cooper workload. But since that came out like 20 minutes before the game, 10 minutes before the game ended up starting, a lot of people didn't see that, thus starting Amari Cooper. So to many, Amari Cooper was an immense disappointment, but he wasn't given the same amount of snap share that he is normally given. This week, I believe he will be 100% healthy, and I think that Amari Cooper is a must-start wide receiver. This is a guy that could easily finish as a top 5 wide receiver on any given week. In terms of CeeDee Lamb, that exact same argument can be made about him potentially being a top 5 wide receiver any given week. All three of these wide receivers, including Michael Gallup, obviously Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb, are all really fucking good. And with how kind of lackluster Ezekiel Elliott has been playing, I think they are really going to look to be passing the ball with aggression in this matchup. So I really like CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup is kind of the odd man out, but at the same time, if you believe like myself that this is really going to be a high-scoring back-and-forth affair, then you could certainly start Michael Gallup. Is he in the same range as a guy like CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper? In my opinion, no. I wouldn't consider Michael Gallup to likely finish inside the top 10 or the top 5 like either CeeDee Lamb or Amari Cooper could, but I also wouldn't be surprised at all if Michael Gallup was a top 24-esque wide receiver on the week. The other Washington football team wide receiver of name is DeAndre Carter, but if I'm being honest with you, I don't want to start him or any of the other Washington football team receivers. And it's not because any of these guys are really bad or anything, but it's because they don't really have a clear number 2 wide receiver. Terry McLaurin's the clear number 1, but besides that, it is very lackluster. It's a lot like the Green Bay Packers offense, where they have a bunch of names. They've got Randall Cobb. They've got, obviously, Devontae Adams. He's the number 1 guy. But they've got MVS. They have Allen Lazard. They have all these other guys that could do something, but you really never know which week it's going to be for these guys, so I'd rather just sit them down. That's the same case with the Washington football team wide receivers. Next up, we move to the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Titans. It appears that Julio Jones should be good to go in this game, but I'm still not wanting to really start any of these guys. I think if you're a little bit crazy, then maybe you could start Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, wide receiver of the Tennessee Titans, because of the matchup, because they're playing the Jaguars. But at the end of the day, I don't really want to heavily hinge on that. I think in this matchup, we could just see a whole lot of Dontrell Hilliard and Deonta Foreman in this matchup just jam the ball down the throat of the Jacksonville Jaguars and hopefully see success that way. So I don't really want anything to do with either of those wide receivers. I think a lot of people are going to talk themselves into Laquan Treadwell. He has looked pretty solid over the last couple of games, but the Jacksonville Jaguars offense is a complete and utter fucking shit show. It is an unmitigated disaster. It is a fucking dumpster fire. I talked about it in yesterday's running back video. I talked about how they have James Robinson, who is the best player on the team, and somehow, some way, this guy makes just one slight move, right? He makes a bad move. He fumbles the ball. I understand that's a big deal, but you can't fucking bench your best player because he fumbles the ball. The Urban Meyer experiment here in Jacksonville has been atrocious. It has been terrible. Laquan Treadwell, while he's been seeing an uptick in work, I just don't really trust him. I think the Tennessee Titans defense is pretty solid, and Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, all of these guys, I'm just sitting them down. I mean, Trevor Lawrence just is not looking good. Is that because Trevor Lawrence is not an NFL-ready quarterback? Of course not. He probably on any other team would be playing fan-fucking-tastic right now, but based upon the fact that he's on the Jaguars, this team just stinks. Sit down, all of the wide receivers here, including the ones on the Titans. Of course, when A.J. Brown comes back, then I'll feel pretty comfortable starting at least one Tennessee Titans wide receiver. Next up, we move to the Seattle Seahawks at the Houston Texans, and I understand people are going to be confused. Nick, how can you possibly sit DK Metcalf? This is a wet dream matchup. This is an amazing matchup up against the Houston Texans. Why could you ever, or how could you ever, make yourself sit DK Metcalf? And the reason why I'm telling you to sit DK Metcalf is because this guy hasn't done shit over the last 5-6 games. He is not getting it done. Russell Wilson has some type of vendetta up against DK Metcalf, and he is just not getting the ball. If there was ever a week where Seattle was able to lay the pipe to another team like the Houston Texans and get DK Metcalf involved, it would be this week. But last week, we hear this narrative, Pete Carroll, oh, let's give DK Metcalf the ball more. Where was that, Pete Carroll? What is this? It is so frustrating if you have DK Metcalf on your team. Now, personally, in the offseason, if you guys were watching my offseason content for the draft season, I talked about how I wasn't 100% sold in on DK Metcalf. And I guess I was right, because this guy just has not been involved down the stretch of the season. I don't get it at all. Obviously, if I was the quarterback of the team, I'd throw it to the fucking huge guy that can catch any ball thrown near him. That's what I would do, but that's not what Russell Wilson does. So DK Metcalf is best left on your bench. In terms of the Houston Texans, Brandon Cooks is worthy of a start in this game. I understand that Davis, the neck, Mills is going to be starting in this game, so obviously that's far from an ideal quarterback. But in this matchup up against the Seattle Seahawks, I do think that Brandon Cooks could get it done. My confidence is not very high at all, but I do think you can start him. For Tyler Lockett, Russell Wilson's just feeding this guy the ball. He is just turning the other cheek to DK Metcalf, and he's just feeding the fucking rock aggressively to Tyler Lockett. So I like Lockett in this game. Nico Collins, the other wide receiver for the Houston Texans to name. I mean, he is just the other big, quote-unquote, big-name receiver there that you may have heard of. I'm not starting him here this week. I mean, this Texans team just isn't going to look good with Davis Mills under center. I just think Brandon Cooks may be able to break free from the bad of the neck himself, Davis Mills. But before we could pivot on to the next game, I would like to ask that if you have ended up enjoying thus far, please make sure that you do hit that like button as well as that subscribe button. I would appreciate it a ton. Next up, we move to the Las Vegas Raiders at the Kansas City Chiefs. Hunter fucking Renfrow. HF. That's what we need to call this guy. This dude is amazing. He is getting peppered, Salt Bay style, with targets game in and game out. This dude is amazing. And there's nothing crazy about this guy's game, right? He's not this super speedy wide receiver. He doesn't have, like if you were playing Madden, like that X factor, that crazy thing that he does. He's just above average at every single thing. Well, I guess his X factor probably would be route running, because this dude is nice with it. He's juking defenders out of their goddamn socks when he's running his routes. So this dude is an elite route runner going up against the Kansas City Chiefs defense. I love Hunter Renfrow in this matchup. I think this could be a very high-scoring game. Tyreek Hill, you start him every single week. This is one of those wide receivers. I explain this in every wide receiver video, but I just love talking about it. It's like in NFL Street, if you guys have ever played that game, NFL Street 1, 2, or 3. That was one of my favorite games when I was a kid. But in that game, you can get the game breaker, where basically everyone runs really fast. The defense can't stop you at all if you're on offense. That's Tyreek Hill. He is a permanent game breaker. This guy could run circles around the Raiders DBs, and I think that Tyreek Hill is one of the only wide receivers in fantasy football that can be a true game breaker, meaning when he flips on, when he has that big game, all he needs is like 4 catches to get 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's just how good Tyreek Hill is, and I love him here up against the Raiders. I love him every week, though. Why? Because he's one of the best receivers in the NFL to me. I don't really like diving super deep into these guys where it's just an obvious no-brainer. You got to start Tyreek Hill. For the Las Vegas Raiders, they also kind of have a game breaker of their own. They have Deshaun Jackson for the Las Vegas Raiders. Very fast. The upside is immense. It's like a 15, 20-plus point performance, but the downside is down in the fucking gutter, where this guy gets 3 targets, catches 1 pass, gets like 8 yards, and does nothing, or what he did in that other game. I don't even remember who they were playing. It was on prime time. The man catches the ball, and he just fucking hands it to the other team. I don't know what this guy's doing. The upside is so high, but the downside to me, the risk is just not worth the reward, in my opinion. From McCole Hardman, Byron Pringle, Mr. Josh Gordon, all these other pieces for the Chiefs, I just don't want anything to be doing with that. Next up, we move to the New Orleans Saints at the New York Jumbo Jets. In this game, I like Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore played really good last week up against the Houston Texans, and if I'm being honest with you, he should have had another touchdown that was very close. His feet were out of bounds. Either his feet were out of bounds or Zach Wilson missed him. One or the other. I don't have the exact photographic memory for that exact play on a game that no one gives a shit about. Last week, Zach Wilson looked good. But if I'm being honest with you, Stevie Wonder could fucking dissect the Houston Texans defense. So does that mean that Zach Wilson is terrible, right? Because I made that joke? Of course not. Zach Wilson is all right. And hopefully he continues on this trend of being all right, because then I'm a lot more comfortable starting Elijah Moore going forward. Corey Davis is going to be out for the next 8 to 10 weeks, which is good news for the Jets fans because he's going to be back just in time for their Super Bowl run, so that's great for the Jets. Elijah Moore, though, is the clear number one wide receiver. This Saints defense has been so hard to kind of whip the microscope out and understand. You look at all the statistics, and it's so fucking confusing. One week, they literally look like the 85 Bears. They look like one of the best defenses in all of the NFL, and then the next week, everything falls apart. They look like they can't do anything, and then the week after that, they look amazing again. Then they have a couple of down games. Then they look great again. It's like a fucking roller coaster that just constantly goes up and down. It is very confusing, but at the end of the day, I think Elijah Moore will be able to get it done up against the New Orleans Saints with Mallet Finger Hill, Taysom Hill, young Mallet Finger. I just don't really trust any of these Saints wide receivers. I talked about this in yesterday's video when talking about the running backs, that Taysom Hill would rather just tap on his own chest, go do the Wolf of Wall Street, you know what I'm talking about, where they do that thing with Matthew McConaughey. I think that's literally what he does. He would rather, it's me. I'm running the ball, pal. Give me the ball. I'm going to do it myself. Fuck it. I'll do it myself. It's like that video where Randall Cobb, is it Randall Cobb or is it Jordy Nelson in Madden, where he's got the broken leg and he's like, got to put the fucking team on my back though. If you know what I'm talking about, that's what Taysom Hill does. He puts the team on his back. Darren Sharper, hold my dick, while he's running the ball with his mallet finger. So he's going to do that. The Saints could easily mollywop the Jets, but I don't think any of these wide receivers are clearly the number one wide receiver. It's just very confusing for New Orleans, and I'm not sure how much they're going to be passing in this game. Maybe they will go ahead and look at the Navy playbook, or maybe they'll go ahead and look at the playbook of Bill Belichick from Monday Night Football and just run the ball a million times down the Jets' throat. So I don't like Traquan Smith or Marquez Callaway. Jamison Crowder is the other wide receiver of note for the Jets. And again, with how hard it is to discern the Saints defense and how clear it is to me that Elijah Moore is the number one wide receiver, I just want to avoid the other Jets wide receivers. Next up, we move to the Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. In this game, I am very interested to see what the Panthers look like. Is Cam Newton going to look like the Cam Newton up against the Dolphins, or is it going to look like the Cam Newton from the prior week where the guy was like MVP Cam, where he was dominant, and then they just fired Joe Brady. They fired this motherfucker while he was on bye week, and I read a report, maybe this was false, but they called him up on the phone. They said, hey Joe, you're fired, but they couldn't even tell him, like, he wasn't answering the phone. So then the next day, after it already came out that he was fired, then they fired him. It's hilarious. What is up with the Carolina Panthers? Why are you firing Joe Brady? What did Joe Brady do wrong? He was not dealt the correct hand. Mono Man Sam fucking sucks. Then they bring back Cam. Cam sucks up against the Dolphins. They have PJ Walker. Christian McCaffrey's hurt. Everything has went wrong for the Panthers, yet they still fire the offensive coordinator that a lot of people thought was going to get a head coaching job. He was, I believe, the guy that was thought of to be the head coach of the Houston Texans prior to their signing of the other head coach. So I thought that was really funny that they fired Joe Brady. Maybe he was just the scapegoat. It is what it is, though. Falcons at Panthers, back into the main point of the video. DJ Moore, despite the fact that the Panthers suck complete and utter donkey cock up against the Dolphins, was still able to get open and was still throwing the ball by Cam Newton. I think DJ Moore's a guy that you got to start every week. The question is, which Cam Newton are we going to see? And if we see the good version of Cam, then DJ Moore could honestly be the best receiver in fantasy this week. And then in terms of the Atlanta Falcons, Russell Gage, this man has put up 3 games on the season with 0 points, with a goose egg, with a bagel, whatever you want to call it when you score 0 points. But over the last 3 weeks, this man has been a target hog. The Panthers defense, pretty underrated in my opinion, but got absolutely doused by the Dolphins, not last week, but the week prior, because the Panthers were on bye last week. I like Russell Gage. I just think he's going to be seeing a bunch of targets here. Volume is king in fantasy football. I think Russell Gage is going to be seeing a lot of volume. For the other wide receivers in this game, Robbie Anderson, the island boy himself, he saw like one solid game with Cam Newton when Cam Newton pulled up out of nowhere in that game and threw a touchdown. I believe that was up against the Arizona Cardinals. And then after that, he hasn't done anything. So Robbie Anderson is a guy that is a good receiver. He just doesn't get the ball. So don't want to be starting him. And then Olamide Zacchaeus is going to be a sit for me because, again, Russell Gage and Cordero Patterson are literally the only wide receivers I'm very confident in, or the only real players on the Falcons I'm confident in. Sure, I'm going to start Kyle Pitts every week, but I'm not even very comfortable doing that. Next up, we move to the Baltimore Ravens at the Cleveland Browns. In this game, it was just reported on my cellular device that Jarvis Landry was a DNP today, meaning he did not participate in practice, and that's not very good. But maybe he does end up playing. This would be a game where I think Jarvis Landry would be seeing a bunch of targets. He did look pretty good up against the Baltimore Ravens the last time these two teams went toe-to-toe in prime time. So I do like Jarvis Landry here if he is able to play. If he doesn't play, I'm going to fade all the other wide receivers like Donovan Peoples-Jones. I just don't really trust them. For the Baltimore Ravens, you're firing up Hollywood Brown. You play Hollywood Brown every single week. And this is one of those guys that you know has the upside to literally beat the shit out of your opponent. Like, this guy could individually, by himself, put the team on his back and win you your week, but he could also at the same time be a disaster and get you like 5 points. To pull up some stats, let's go ahead and look at from week 5 all the way until week number 13. So in week 5, 29 half PPR points. The week after that, 5 points. Then 16.5, 16.1, 6 points, 9.1 points. And last week up against the Steelers, 8 points. So the range of outcomes differ greatly, right? There's some great games, then there's some not so good games, you know? I don't like, Borat doesn't say that, he says, I like, but I still do actually like playing Hollywood Brown. I like playing him because the upside is there, and you can't get that with a lot of receivers, so I'm playing Hollywood Brown in this matchup. Rashad Bateman just is not getting the volume, and to me, I just don't really trust him. He's the number 2 guy there. But in reality, is he though? Because Mark Andrews is either the number 1 or the number 2. Then Hollywood Brown is either the number 1 or the number 2. So Bateman's kind of cucked in this offense. I don't trust Bateman, so I'm sitting him down again. If Jarvis Landry doesn't play, I'm not going to move Donovan Peoples-Jones up in my rankings. Next up, we move to the New York Football Giants at the LA Chargers. Came out while I was recording this video as well that Mike Williams will join Keenan Allen on the COVID IR. Meaning, will he be able to play this week? I'm not too sure because I have no idea if either of them are vaccinated. Obviously, if they end up playing, you are going to play them. This is a smash matchup up against the New York Football Giants. This should be a cupcake game where I expect Keenan Allen and Mike Williams to have a humongous showing. If neither of them do end up playing, I would be somewhat interested in maybe Josh Palmer or Jalen Guyton, but when I say somewhat interested, I mean like if I'm down bad at receiver, then maybe I'd pick him up and play him. Otherwise, though, I'd probably just fade this game as a whole in terms of the wide receiver position. For the Giants, Tony, Galladay, up in the air if either of them end up playing. Darius Slayton should be good to go. Don't really trust him. Who's the quarterback going to be? Seems like it could be Jake from State Farm, but it could also be the other neck guy. We already talked about the neck himself, Davis Mills. But Mike Glennon, the original neck, the dude with the huge giraffe neck, could play as well. Either way, though, I don't trust any of them. They stink. So just sit all these guys down for the Giants. It's really sad the path that the Giants have gone down as of recently. What a fall from grace from that team back in the day with Odell and Eli. You really hate to see that. Next up, we move to the San Francisco 49ers at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals just got absolutely clobbered by the LA Chargers, the team we just talked about last week. This is a matchup that could be very high scoring, just like that matchup last week up against the LA Chargers. Hopefully Joe Burrow is good to go. We saw he did get banged up, I believe, the pinky finger in that game, which is not the greatest. He looked like he was in a tremendous amount of pain throwing on the sideline, if you guys saw that. Like, right after he got hurt, he threw the ball, and he screamed like he just took 5 fucking AK shots to the stomach. It was crazy, but I hope he's okay because this could be a very high-scoring affair between the San Francisco 49ers and the Cincinnati Bengals. Will Deebo Samuel play or not? Now, I am not a doctor. I'm just about as much of a doctor as, you know, Johnny Sins or something like that, right? I'm not a doctor, but based upon what I've seen, I don't think Deebo is going to play. If he does play, you got to play him. Why? Because he's one of the best wide receivers in all of fantasy football right now, so you got to play him, and he's been getting a lot of rushing opportunity as well. But if he does not end up playing, I love Brandon Ayuk this week. Last week, I liked Brandon Ayuk a lot, and he didn't play all that well. Didn't perform great, but he also wasn't a complete disaster on your team. Even if Deebo does play, though, I'm still fine playing Ayuk, but my ranking of him would obviously be lower. For the Bengals, Higgins has been on a tear. Jamar Chase, not so much, but I'm definitely playing both of them. I think Jamar Chase dropped it. I don't think. I saw the game. He dropped a ball. That could have been, I think that was a 50 or 60-yard touchdown for Mr. Chase. Obviously, when you're watching that game, you're pissed off if you had Jamar Chase. I know he's been in a little bit of a slump, but I think he could get out of it this week. And you can't really sit a guy that talented just because he's in a slump. But Nick, you're sitting DK Metcalf, you fucking idiot. He's better than Jamar Chase, you fucking dumbass. And maybe, but DK Metcalf's in a slump because he's not getting the ball. At least Jamar Chase is getting the ball thrown to him. Mr. T. Higgins is definitely going to be a start. The guy's on fire. In terms of the other 49ers and Bengals wide receivers, Tyler, Boyd, wide receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals. He's kind of the odd man out in that trio there of T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Boyd. He's the odd man out, so you're not going to start him. Juwan Jennings is the number 2 behind Ayuk as long as Debo doesn't play, but I don't really want to be starting him either. Next up, we move to a matchup between the Buffalo Bills at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I don't know if I talked about this in yesterday's video, but man, do I feel bad for the Buffalo Bills. They just had a demoralizing loss to the Patriots, where Mac Jones threw the ball 3 fucking times, so they had to just play the clone of Tom Brady Jr., and now they gotta play the man himself. They have to play the Patriots twice in a row, basically. And I'm pretty sure next week, they play the Patriots again. They are down bad right now, especially if they lose all 3 of these games. Man, that's a reality check for all the Bills fans who thought they ran the AFC East. What can I say, though? I'm a Dolphins fan. They're not all that great, but down the stretch, we've looked really good, and we're going to the Super Bowl. I've said that multiple times. So the Buffalo Bills at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Chris Godwin just dominated. He was just getting so many points, getting so many catches up against the Atlanta Falcons last week. Is this matchup as easy as that game? Of course not. But Nick, the Bills defense did terrible up against the Patriots. I still think the Bills have one of the best defenses in the NFL, so I do think that could hamper Chris Godwin, but I'm still going to play him, just like I'm still going to play Mike Evans without Antonio Brown. Is Antonio Brown even going to return to the team? I'm not sure. He's still suspended, I think, for one more game after this one. Then we'll see what happens if they end up cutting him or if he ends up returning to the team. But with that said, without Antonio Brown, my confidence level in both of them is a lot higher. In terms of the Buffalo Bills, Stephon Diggs didn't make a catch. That was in the corner of the end zone. It was right there. Somehow didn't catch it. It is what it is, right? Still one of the best receivers in the NFL. Has really caught fire as of recently, so I'm definitely starting him up against the Bucs. The other Bills receivers, though, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, they haven't really done shit as of recently, so I don't want to be rolling them out. Next up, we pivot to Sunday Night Football between the Chicago Bears at the Green Bay Packers. In this game, I like Darnell. Here comes the Mooney. Allen Robinson probably going to return in this game. Justin Fields set to be the quarterback in this matchup up against the Packers. As we all know, Aaron Rodgers stated that the Bears are owned by the Green Bay Packers. Probably true. The Packers probably eviscerate the Bears. And just like we talked about with the Washington football team, how I compared them to the Packers, it's true. It really is. Now, are they necessarily the same level of players? Is Terry McLaurin as good as Davante Adams right now? No. But I hope that you guys can understand the correlation I'm making, because it really is true. Because when you play these Packers wide receivers, you understand the upside of a guy like MVS, Allen Lazard, of any of these guys, Randall Cobb, right? You understand the upside that they have, but it's never clear week in, week out who the number 2 receiver is behind Davante Adams. That's the same thing with the Washington football team. That's why I kind of noted that a little bit earlier. When it comes to Davante Adams, you play him every week, and to me, you just sit down the other wide receivers. For the Bears, I'm playing Darnell Mooney. Didn't have all that great of a performance last week, but I do think he could bounce back this week with Justin Fields under center, so I like Darnell Mooney. And fuck Allen Robinson, man. This guy, I don't know, he just stinks this year. Final game here, Monday Night Football between the LA Rams at the Arizona Cardinals. Will the Rams get their revenge and eat that W Jameis Winston style here, or are they going to end up losing yet again to the Arizona Cardinals? Very interesting. Give me your guys' prediction. If you made it like 30 plus minutes into the video, maybe 28 minutes, something like that, if you guys think the Rams are going to win or the Arizona Cardinals. My personal bet would be on the Cardinals, but I hope that the Rams win personally, because I like watching. Honestly, I don't really give a fuck who wins, right? They're in the NFC. It has nothing to do with the Dolphins playoff picture, but I think it would be nice for Mr. Matthew Stafford to get a nice win here up against the Arizona Cardinals. With that said, I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. It was a high-scoring game the first time these two teams played. Cooper Kupp, that man had the craziest explanation at the end of the game. I don't know if you saw the clip. He explained basically what the defense was doing, what he was doing, and he was speaking so fast. He was speaking like fucking Eminem in a Rap God. It was crazy, but he's a smart guy. I love Cooper Kupp. You're going to play him this week up against the Cardinals. For Van Jefferson and Odell Beckham Jr., it's very up in the air, like a fucking clown juggling at the circus. on who the number 2 receiver is. Is it Odell? Is it Van Jefferson? Based upon the last 2 weeks, it's been Van Jefferson, but Odell has looked good as well. This could be a high-scoring game. They could all mosey their way on into the end zone, so I like all 3 in this game. Obviously, like Cooper Kupp far more than the others, and then in terms of the Arizona Cardinals, DeAndre Hopkins, you got to start him. That's kind of a no-brainer, and a lot like the Packers, the Washington football team, the Cardinals have other wide receivers like Christian Kirk, like A.J. Green, but every single week it's very hard to decipher who the number 2 is, so I'd rather just sit them all. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hitting that like button. I would appreciate it a ton. I love you guys all. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, kabwee!